So the two speakers are Maria Artiles, is that correct?
That's me, yep.
Good. Maria is digital engineering consultancy, member of the digital engineering consultancy division of Element, materials technology, and specialises in the use of modelling, simulation, and other digital solutions across locations in the UK and the US. Mechanical engineer by background, PhD in hard tissue biomechanics, a bit beyond me, so I'll... Right, and Harvey is background in mechanical engineering as well, has spent the last 3 years delivering technically challenging projects to a tight timescale in a range of industries. So I look forward to that combination. Thank you. I'll get out of the way.
Thank you. Excellent. Right. Okay, yeah. So, pleasure to be in front of you all today. We're going to give you a bit of an introduction into something a bit different. And this is kind of straying into the world of digital testing and digital engineering rather than looking at the sort of physical side of product development. We're going to talk you through who we are at Element Digital Engineering, because we're a relatively new capability in the company, and kind of how we got to the point where we are now. We're going to discuss how we complement the wider Element business and how we fit in, and how we can be used to provide some value alongside some of the physical testing that we offer. And we're also going to take a look at what in silico technologies mean to us and where we see that kind of market going. So once we've done that, I'm going to hand over to Maria, who's going to talk through some real world case studies where we've used the kind of tools that we specialise in to deliver value, and looking across a few of our different areas of capability. We are going to have some Slido questions in here today, so I'd be very grateful if you can have your Slidos at the ready, because we've got one where it'd be good for people to sort of tick some boxes and we can discuss the results. Fantastic. Right, so to kick us off, who are Element Digital Engineering? So we're very much the sort of consultancy division of Element Materials Technology. We're a bit different to the rest of the company in that we offer a digital capability rather than a physical one, which is rather obvious from the name. We were formed from a number of engineering consultancies who were specialists in the use of simulation and modelling, and very much in the kind of core areas of physics-based modelling. And we're now a small part of the much larger Element machine. It's kind of interesting to see how fast Element's size and capability is growing. These are some slides that were created when we were acquired in 2021, and one of my colleagues earlier pointed out we've got 6,000 employees here. I think that's up to 9,000 now. So even in that short time, we're really seeing massive growth across the company, and that's a growth in capability as well, and that's where we come in to offer a slightly different capability. So the sort of marriage between digital engineering and Element as a physical testing organisation is a very productive one. We share many of the same clients. We just operate at different parts, usually in the product life cycle, but there's definitely a lot of overlap, and there's a lot of areas where we found that we can collaborate really effectively together. We participate in a number of nationally funded R&D programs, and we also have partnerships with major analysis software companies. So one of the things we like to do is that we really push our analysis tools to the limit, and sometimes we actually end up breaking these software tools, which is similar to what our other Element colleagues do with the physical systems. I think it's much more fun to break those physical systems than it is to break a software package, but we're really keen to push these tools to the limit, and those companies are really keen to get that kind of feedback and understand perhaps how their tools can be improved and optimized, and perhaps understanding where some of the vulnerabilities of their tools are, and we help them to develop those methods. Where the commercial analysis packages don't quite cut it for us. We're also capable of developing our own software solutions. So this can be everything from a simple Python script or something like that to a full software package with a graphical user interface. So that's an area that is, really interesting for us. But I guess it's worth highlighting here that although we do partner with other sort of software companies and we develop our own tools, we're very much software agnostic. So we'll always use the best tool for the choice. The best tool for a specific application, and we'll accommodate perhaps a client request if a client is more used to using a specific tool. So if we're going to kind of summarize what that all means into one sentence, we essentially use digital tools to solve technical challenges, and that's really at the core of what we do. So just to build on that previous slide and highlight some of those core capabilities, I'm hoping that some of these will be familiar to you. And this is where Slido is going to come in. So the question here is about which of these is actually more likely to be relevant for your company. And I'm just going to sort of go over some of these while you can click away on Slido. So the top two that we have there are looking at very much physics-based models. So we're looking at analysis of structures, analysis of fluids, looking at heat transfer. So this is the real core area of traditional engineering analysis. It's a very well-known area of physics. It's been tried and tested for a really long time now. And it's something that some engineers now in the industry refer to as the easy stuff. I certainly push back on that, considering some of the projects I've been working on lately. But these are the areas where you get that full explicit model. You can get really a lot of data out of it. You can really get a deep understanding of your system and look into it in ways that you can possibly sort of gain the same kind of insight with a physical test. Where you might not need such an explicit approach, or perhaps you don't want to take this slightly more time-consuming route of having a complete virtual representation of your system, you might want to take an approach of looking at taking a sort of scripting or mathematical modeling approach, and that's where you can develop something that is a little bit more rudimentary. It can give you an answer in real time, but it won't provide that kind of granularity perhaps that you need in a fully explicit model. We also do a lot now in the world of data, so looking at how we can sort of extract the extra value from all of the data we're gathering. So that might be from the physical tests that we're doing, or it might be for a product or system that's in service, and try and extract all of that extra information. But it's also looking at the data that we get from some of our numerical studies as well. There's a huge amount of data there that is often missed out on. So using tools like data science and machine learning, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is a really hot topic right now. There's lots of interesting applications that we're only really just waking up to, and it's something that we'll sort of touch upon later on in these slides as well. So we also offer digital twins, and this is often used in conjunction with the term in silico. Although in silico it tends to be used in the medical industry in a very all-encompassing way, just to mean anything essentially that is using some kind of computational analysis associated with it. But when I'm using the term digital twin here, I'm really talking about something that is a method essentially for breaking down a very complex system and reducing it to a very simple set of equations. So you can effectively develop a very simple model that can run in real time, and you can input some real world data. So for example, that might be a medical device, and you can input some sort of data based on someone's movement, and you can use that to get some kind of answer out of it, whether that be sort of damage accumulated by fatigue or something like that. So it's about reducing our system down into something very simple, and it takes a lot of analysis to get to that point, to understand your system to that level of granularity. We also offer the more bespoke solutions, where that might come to developing software or workflow automation. So that really means either developing our own tools or finding opportunities to connect tools up. So just to use an example from earlier, if we're doing some kind of data manipulation from one of our numerical models, how do we do that? Can we connect a data analysis tool directly to our finite element package or computational fluid dynamic package, and remove that human input in between those steps and just reduce that risk and make that process really efficient. So connecting different packages together and automating workflows is a really interesting area just to drive forward those innovations and make them a lot more efficient. So how do we fit in with element materials technology and the wider side of the business? So if we think about the product life cycle, which takes us all the way from our early R&D stages all the way to in-field operation, most of Element's clients would traditionally interact with Element on as we sort of move through the life cycle and approach the right-hand side. So not necessarily in the R&D phase. So our kind of core area of physics-based modeling and simulation is often associated with this left-hand side. So we may want to use tools like finite element analysis to explore a design space. So we may have some kind of concept or a prototype, and we may want to, what happens if we change this dimension? What if we use these different kind of inputs? We can really rapidly assess that kind of design of experiments using modeling and simulation, and we can perhaps aid in that concept down selection process. But the other kind of capabilities that we've got in data science and machine learning very much sit on the same end as the wider Element business operates in. And as we move across that product life cycle, we get to things like digital asset management. And this is a term that's not really bandied around a lot in the medical industry. But to give you an example from aerospace, and I'll probably lose a few of you here, but if we're looking at sort of aircraft engines, for example, you might be really interested, once something's in service, we might be really interested in how the life of one of the components is affected by how we're operating that particular engine. So if we're running the thing at 110% power, does that mean we're going to have to take it out of service sooner? Do we really have a problem? Can we use some of the data that we have on it to understand that problem? And that's where we get something like a digital twin to give us that answer. So we can use that digital twin to say, actually, perhaps this isn't a problem. So there is definitely room to move towards this in the medical industry. I think Michael mentioned earlier about his smartwatch. And that's the kind of sensor data that perhaps could inform things like digital asset management for implanted medical devices, for example. So one of the things that we see a lot of our clients coming to us now for is to look at doing sort of fatigue analyses and replicating fatigue tests in a digital space, and perhaps sort of going beyond the number of cycles that are assessed in fatigue. And it's worth noting that fatigue here is coming from the movement of a person. It's all being driven, it's all trying to replicate that movement in the body and to try and understand how many cycles we can go through until this thing actually fails. So that's not going to be the same across every person. People will move differently. So we might be able to use devices in the future like smartwatches to determine perhaps if the life of an implant could be extended just based on the amount that someone's moving. So there's some really interesting areas that we can get to in digital asset management once these technologies become a bit more mature in this industry. But I think the key point here really is that we're now able to offer a service that means you can engage with Element earlier on in the product life cycle. So we enable that sort of thread of continuity all the way through from R&D to through compliance and post-market. So instead of having this as a bit of a Slido question, we can just do this as a show of hands. I'm really interested to know when you think about your products or the products you're planning on bringing to market, have you used any digital engineering tools such as finite element analysis or data science as part of that product development? And perhaps we could just do a show of hands if anyone has used such a tool. Okay, it's really interesting. Yeah, okay, I think we've got, a fair few. So before I hand over to Maria, I think we're just going to do a slide on what is the role of digital engineering in medical technologies and how will it impact the future of medical technologies. So What we're starting to see is that these methods are starting to be accepted by regulatory bodies. So we see our clients coming to us with requests from the FDA and are looking for us to conduct some sort of analysis to specifically target an FDA requirement. This has actually been the case in other industries for quite a long time, and other industries are a bit more mature on this, but for whatever reason, medical technologies it has been traditionally a bit slower on the uptake around this. However, this is definitely predicted to change. Just got some statistics from a recent study that's taken place looking at in silico technology and the future of in silico technology in the UK. And it predicts actually that 50% of all new medical devices will use in silico technologies as part of the R&D cycle by 2025. And I'm sure there may be some people in the room here that will be a bit skeptical of these figures, and that's perfectly understandable. But at Digital Engineering, we're really starting to see OEMs engage with us a lot more around this stuff as they start to see that they can push forward innovations in a much faster, cost-effective and a better way, really, to produce those innovations. So actually getting to that point, there's still some way to go. So the process of drawing up these standards and engaging with these regulatory bodies is definitely ongoing. So again, this is something that's already taken place in other industries, and it's definitely an ongoing process in other industries as well. And it's mostly around developing these good simulation practices, and this is where people like us will need to engage with some of these communities to establish these good simulation practices. And from there, we can develop those guidelines which allow us to contribute to the sort of regulatory packages alongside the physical testing. So we're certainly not talking about replacing physical testing here. It's absolutely always going to be the case that needs to be done. But we're looking at augmenting that process using digital methods. So perhaps we can expand the envelope of what can be done with physical tests. Perhaps we can test more things. Perhaps we can test them faster. And essentially allow us to use our physical tests, which are often quite expensive, in the most efficient way. So getting things right perhaps in the early stages of that product life cycle and making sure when we reach that testing phase that we'll get a pass. So Maria's going to go and talk through some case studies now, and just like to ask a question about, actually we're going to get to the end and go through some of the questions, but I'm really keen for you to keep in mind while we go through these case studies about what your main concern with the use of digital engineering tools is. And there are some sort of preset answers there on Slido which you can select, and we can go over that at the end. And there is also the option to add your own. So I think this would be a really good thing to focus on towards the end, as this is the kind of thing that we often, the kind of questions that we often find ourselves facing. So I'll hand over to Maria without further ado.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I guess while I present the three case studies that we have for today, it'll be good if you can keep this question in your head and see if there is anything stopping you from reaching out and using digital engineering tools in your projects. So the first case study that we've got here concerns a cruise ship retaining femur prosthesis, which is essentially a type of knee implant. And I think it highlights quite well how modeling and simulation and experimental tests can complement each other. So in this project, we had our client who had designed these prostheses, and as part of their pathway to taking this to market, they had to perform some experimental fatigue tests of the prostheses being subjected to cyclic loading, so thousands of cycles of a load being applied and then removed. And after they performed the test, they found out that there were some fatigue cracks developing in some regions of the prostheses that were unexpected, let's say. So they were seeing fatigue cracks in areas that were meant to be under compression, when fatigue cracks usually develop when areas are in tension. So when you're sort of pulling apart is when you expect to see a crack. So they were a bit confused by this, and the experiments weren't really telling them the reason behind this. So they asked us to perform some finite element analysis of the test. So we replicated the experimental setup in our numerical model, And we were able to show them how the stresses were developing in their processes over the different cycles. And we found out that the reason why the cracks were happening was because there were some tensile residual stresses, because the material was yielding in a specific location that was too thin, and that was causing the cracks. And then once we had that answer and we were able to correlate quite well our models with their experiments, we were able to provide some recommendations, some design changes that they could make so that they could then repeat the test and hopefully pass it this time. This second case study is, I guess, looks at the earlier kind of like phases of a product life cycle. So here we're looking at a pressurized meter dose inhaler, which is a drug delivery system commonly used to treat things like asthma. And the way that it works is that it's got some droplets that contain an active compound. These droplets are atomized, and then they travel through our airways and then to our lungs, and the active compound is then deposited there and does its thing. And really, before anyone decides to do a prototype or to manufacture this, they could try and perhaps optimize its effectiveness. So we could, using numerical simulations such as computational fluid dynamics, look at what the effect of changing things like the nozzle diameter, the pressure at which that is operating, the materials of different compounds, the size of the droplets, even the temperature at which it's functioning. We could make all those changes and also change the actual design and try to evaluate what those changes have an impact on the results. The type of results that you would see are the ones on that bottom image there, where you can see the different droplets that have different sizes being deposited at different locations of the lungs. So you would have as many as you want to explore in that design space. And that would help the designers and the people involved in the development of this medical device to make decisions before even having to do any prototyping or manufacturing, and really just help with that decision-making process. And then this final case study, it's a bit out of a bit different to the previous ones because it doesn't really involve any physical testing or physical numerical modeling. This one is more in the data science area and software development. So in this case, we had a client who had been working and running their lab and doing experiments for many, many years. And they had collected a lot of experimental data, but it was just being stored in a database somewhere, and it was not easy to query or to extract any valuable information from it. So they came to us, and we managed to create a knowledge-based platform where all the data was properly organized, and where people who were not programmers or software developers could really easily access it via a web app or a desktop-based app. And then they could query all that data, analyze it, make predictions of what would happen for future experiments. And when new data is available, it would be quite easy to incorporate it as well in this sort of cycle. And yeah, I think those are the 3 case studies that we have for today. We can move into questions, or maybe we can look at that slide or question that you presented earlier.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, if we could pull up the slide of question.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Software development.
Interesting, yeah. That wasn't the answer I was expecting, which is good. So yeah, it's very interesting that we see. Sorry.
Can I ask the question? Which do you think is the most potentially valuable of those?
Valuable.
Or is that an impossible question to answer? I'm surprised digital twins is sort of a bit out in the future, isn't it? It's a big perception, but it strikes me that in some respects that's hugely valuable once that's technology is developed.
Yeah, absolutely is. In terms of what's potentially the most valuable, I suppose it's a difficult question to answer because it depends about where you're using it and what your product is. I suppose it's something like something like data science and machine learning can be incredibly valuable if you've got the data and can really offer you the most insight. I think getting things like your physics, and again it depends on the products, getting things like your physics right and understanding your product in a lot of depth in the very early stages, as we know, that's the area where you're going to reduce the most risk. It is incredibly important. So if you haven't carried out some kind of structural analysis, or if you're working with fluids or heat transfer, that kind of thing, having a look at that early and exploring and understanding your system very early on is something that can potentially reduce the risk throughout that product development life cycle by a huge amount. And can identify any issues very early. So for me, perhaps as a bit more of a traditionalist, that's the area that I
Okay.
like. But yeah.
Any questions on this? I mean, to me, this is all about de-risking, really, isn't it? Using digital technologies to de-risk the process early, so you sort of make your mistakes